I am Morgan. For 6 long years, I was the dependable one. The one who sent money when the fridge broke down, who helped cover my dad's insulin, who made sure my sister's car didn't get repossessed when she missed her payments. Again. I kept my head down and wired cash month after month. But last December, when a kitchen fire ripped through my apartment, I had nowhere to turn. No clothes, no couch, just a half-burned ID and the smell of melted plastic on my coat. I showed up at my mother's front door around 1:30 in the morning. Rain soaked into my shoes, trembling with exhaustion and the kind of grief that doesn't make a sound. She stared at me like I was a problem she hadn't planned for. "Morgan," she said, not even uncrossing her arms, "this isn't a shelter." That was the moment I realized some people don't love you. They love what you do for them. Have you ever had that realization crash into you like that? If so, you'll understand what happened next. Before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Also, share your location and local time in the comments. I'd love to know where you're listening from. I was 12 the first time I felt it. That quiet dismissal. I'd watched a YouTube tutorial and folded our Christmas dinner napkins into little poinsettias, red linen ones I ironed until they were sharp like origami. I placed them neatly around the dining table, hoping for a smile. My mom glanced once and muttered, "Why do you always have to overdo it?" Then she waved at my sister. "Amber, bring out the pie." Amber smiled. I got the silence. I told myself it didn't matter. But moments like that don't vanish. They sink into you. The fire that destroyed my apartment started with faulty wiring. The building was ancient. I'd mentioned it to my parents dozens of times, and even floated the idea of them helping me move, but they always said, "If it ain't broke," until it was. No one called me that night. Not when the fire truck arrived, not when the building manager contacted the tenants. I was the one who called them. And when my mom picked up, it was with the tired voice of someone being bothered during a quiet evening. "Yeah," she said, "we heard. It's all gone, huh?" I waited for the rest. Some acknowledgement. A soft, "Are you safe?" Or maybe, "Thank God you're okay." But nothing came, just, "Well, you knew that place was a risk. No thanks for keeping the insurance up to date." There was no recognition that without my payments, they wouldn't have had a roof over their heads for the last 5 years. I left the fire scene around 10 p.m., still smelling of smoke, and headed back to my shoebox studio on the south side. When I arrived, the hallway carpets were drenched, again. A fire alarm had gone off in a neighboring unit earlier that week and triggered the sprinklers. Waterlogged floors, moldy air, the kind that clings to your clothes and your soul. I sat on the floor for an hour before my body gave out, and I slumped against the doorframe. Eventually, I grabbed my keys and drove through the rain. Past shuttered diners, past gas stations still glowing at midnight. I ended up at my parents' place in Meadowview. I hadn't been there in months, maybe a year. I parked across the street and strolled, squinting through the heavy rain. Their porch light was on. My mother opened the door halfway, wearing one of those silky robes that looked expensive and cold. Amber stood in the hallway behind her, cradling a glass of red wine and saying nothing. I said, "Just for a couple of nights, until I can figure things out." My mom took a step back, but not to let me in, to cross her arms tighter. "Morgan, this isn't a halfway house. You donate to shelters. Maybe they can help now." She nodded slightly toward Amber. "Ask one of the cousins for whom you paid tuition, or maybe that nonprofit you're always raving about." Amber tilted her head just a little. I didn't ask again. I turned and returned to my car, jacket clinging to me like damp skin. I sat there, watching the condensation build up on the windshield. I'd transferred $1,200, 0 cents to Amber last month for her dog's surgery, covered groceries for my parents every Thanksgiving, and helped Dad avoid collections on his credit cards more times than I could count. And here I was, homeless, soaked, alone. I drove to a rundown motel off Highway 14, behind an abandoned strip mall. The desk clerk didn't blink when I handed him my card. He just slid a key across the counter like this was normal. The room smelled like old air freshener and forgotten lives. I lay down on the stiff mattress, shoes still on. I stared at the ceiling until 4 a.m. Then I sat up and opened my phone. I started with the shared family phone plan, removed everyone. I canceled Amber's premium streaming subscriptions tied to my email and stopped Dad's monthly magazine renewals. Suspended Mom's gym membership. I reached the recurring transfer to their account, household support, and paused for one beat. Then I deleted it. It was like peeling off a badge I never asked to wear. My phone buzzed a few minutes later. 67 missed calls. Mom, Amber, Dad, a couple from Uncle James who hadn't called in years. I didn't listen to any voicemails. I just watched the screen as more calls poured in. Not one said, "Are you all right?" Not a single message asking, "Where did you sleep?" Just one text, bold and urgent. "Morgan, do not cancel the mortgage auto pay." I dropped the phone onto the bed and stared at the yellowed tiles. The silence wasn't empty. It was clean. I woke up the next morning stiff from the motel mattress and more mentally exhausted than physically. The buzzing from my phone had finally stopped. Either the battery died or they gave up. I didn't care which. The sun slanted through faded curtains, lighting the peeling wallpaper and dusty carpet. I hadn't eaten since the fire. So I threw on my only dry clothes, jeans and a hoodie from the bottom of my gym bag, and walked to a nearby diner. I ordered scrambled eggs and toast. The waitress didn't make small talk. She just poured coffee like it was an act of mercy, and for once, I didn't feel invisible. I just felt like a person again. While chewing on dry toast, I made a list. Not of revenge, of boundaries, things I would no longer do, people I would no longer bail out, lies I would no longer pretend to believe. When I returned to the motel, I opened my laptop and pulled up the shared family folder I'd kept over the years. Expenses, notes, passwords, account backups. I started deleting. Amber's tax documents I had stored just in case. Gone. His Amazon login helped him every month. Deleted. Mom's recipe archive she never thanked me for digitizing. Wiped. Then I logged into our joint savings account, the one I'd set up years ago to help manage surprise medical bills and house repairs. There it was. A withdrawal request pending for $2,000, 0 cents. Memo line, winter roof fix. I hadn't approved it. I didn't even know the roof needed repairs. I clicked deny. Then I changed the account password. That's when the calls started again. Amber's number flashed across the screen, then Mom. Then a local number I didn't recognize but suspected was my uncle trying from a different line. I didn't answer. Instead, I packed my laptop, zipped up the duffel bag with what few clothes I had left, and drove to the co-working space I used to sponsor. I donated to them quarterly, helping fund scholarships and desk rentals for young freelancers and creators. I'd never used the space myself, until now. The receptionist looked up, surprised. "Morgan, wow, it's been a while. You want a spot by the window?" I nodded. She didn't ask why I hadn't a briefcase or proper bag. She just led me to a desk and left me in peace. That small moment of grace felt bigger than anything I'd gotten from my family in years. I pulled out my tablet and went through every financial thread I'd ever woven into that household. I'd been the silent investor in their lives. Groceries every December, summer camps for Amber's son, new tires for Mom's SUV, dental work for Dad, all logged, all paid, quietly, without ever being asked, without ever being truly seen. And now, I was erasing myself from every bill, every plan, just until we get back on our feet. I clicked through Amber's car lease, which I co-signed. I flagged it for cancellation. The lease agreement had a clause for removing co-signers in the event of financial hardship. I laughed at the irony. Financial hardship? I lived in a motel while she lived in a 3-bedroom rental with a backyard fire pit. Halfway through disconnecting Dad's SiriusXM subscription, my phone buzzed again. This time, I answered. It was my cousin Tyler. "Morgan, hey, look, everyone's freaking out. I don't know what you need, but can you talk to Mom? She's losing it. She says you froze the accounts." I paused, then said, "Did anyone call when the fire happened?" Silence. "No," I continued, "because they didn't need me, not until the money stopped. That's all I was. And now that it's gone, I'm suddenly visible again?" Tyler stumbled over his reply. "We thought you were okay. You're the strong one. You always handle things." There it was, the sentence that had shackled me for years. I always handled things, even when I was breaking, even when I was on fire, even when I had nowhere to sleep but a motel with stained ceilings and broken locks. After the call, I visited the bank. My advisor, Eric, had known me since I was fresh out of college. He didn't ask questions. He just nodded and pulled up my accounts. "I want out of everything tied to them," I said. "Joint, shared, emergency fund, everything." Within 20 minutes, I was unlinked from a financial web I'd helped weave out of guilt, love, and misplaced loyalty. When I left the bank, I felt 10 pounds lighter, not happy, not relieved, just less burdened. I stopped by a food truck outside the co-working space. Tuna melt and a can of iced tea. I ate it slowly, sitting on a park bench where I used to meet Amber for lunch when she worked nearby. I pulled out my phone and searched her name. Her LinkedIn page still says freelance creative director. She hadn't had a stable gig in over a year. Yet, she still managed spa days, new outfits, and fancy cocktails. I guess it's easy when someone else foots the bill. Later that night, back at the motel, I found myself folding the paper napkin that came with my sandwich. Without thinking, I shaped it into a maple leaf, the kind I used to fold as a kid to decorate the dinner table. Only this time, I placed it on the motel pillow, not for anyone to see, not hoping for praise just because it felt like closure. A quiet act that no longer needed permission or validation. I looked around at the room. Peeling paint, cheap artwork screwed into the wall, humming air conditioner that rattled like an old train. It wasn't much, but for the first time, it was mine. Mine in the way freedom is. Not fancy, but real. Then the phone buzzed one last time. It was a text from Amber. "No, sorry." "No, are you okay?" "You should know, Mom's talking to a lawyer." I stared at it for a long time. Then, I typed one word back. Noted. I didn't feel fear, just clarity. They weren't losing me. They'd already let go a long time ago. I'd just finally caught up. The next morning, I sat at the desk in the motel room with a gas station toothbrush between my teeth and my laptop open in front of me. My hands hovered over the keyboard, but I wasn't ready to type yet. The email I was about to write wasn't out of anger, it was out of necessity. I needed to tell the story the way it happened, not the version they were telling. Not the one that painted me as the cold, detached one who abandoned her family. I opened a blank document and titled it What I Paid For. And then I started typing. Line by line, I listed every transfer, every payment, every loan I'd quietly forgiven. Mortgage support monthly, groceries, back-to-school shopping, emergency dental work, even the GoFundMe campaign Amber started for our parents' recovery after the fire. She never mentioned I was the one who paid off the final balance. I listed them all with dates, dollar amounts, and notes. I didn't embellish, I didn't rage, I just documented it. The way I had always lived, quiet, detailed, reliable. But this time, I wasn't doing it to keep things running. I was doing it to stop pretending. Once finished, I formatted the document into an email and BCC'd it to everyone. Every cousin who'd ever asked for help, every church friend my mom had bragged about how well Morgan's doing, and even Dad's financial advisor. At the bottom, I typed one line. You cannot disown someone you never truly welcomed. but I didn't hit send. Not yet. A knock rattled the door just before noon. I peeked through the peephole and froze. My mother. Rain matted her hair, a handbag clutched like a lifeline. She didn't look sad. She looked furious. I cracked the door an inch. She didn't wait for an invite, just pushed past me into the room, scanning the cheap furniture as it offended her. She turned and spat. "You've created chaos. Your father can't go to church without whispers. Amber missed her mortgage payment. Is that what you wanted?" I stood still, let her words echo and fall. "You've embarrassed this family," she continued, voice rising. "And for what? A little money? We're your family." I finally spoke. "It was never about the money. It was about being used. I needed help one time, and you closed the door." Her lip curled. "We were overwhelmed. We thought you were strong, that you didn't need us." I laughed softly. "No, you thought I wouldn't say anything, that I'd keep covering for everyone. Well, I won't. Not anymore." Her face hardened. "You think you're better than us?" I looked her in the eyes. "No. I just finally stopped pretending. I'm less." She grabbed her purse and turned toward the door. "You've changed," she said coldly. I nodded. "No, I just stopped apologizing for not being Amber." The door clicked shut behind her, and the room felt quieter than before, not empty, just mine. I went back to my laptop and clicked send. By morning, the family group chat was exploding. First, Amber, all caps. "Morgan, what did you do?" Then my uncle chimed in with something about dignity and privacy. My mom wrote, "You've crossed a line." Dad, as usual, said nothing. Amber tried calling. I let it ring. When I finally answered, her voice was shaking with controlled fury. "You ruined everything. The bank's frozen our joint account. Mom's beside herself. Dad won't leave his office." I didn't respond. She kept going. "You Mims depend on you, and then you just walk away like none of it mattered." I leaned back. "I didn't make you depend on me. You chose to. You built your lives around my silence, not my consent." She tried to spin it. "You have better credit. You had extra income. We needed you." I interrupted. 2 years ago, you said you needed a cosigner. Just a little help getting approved for that townhouse. I asked if you could handle it, and Mom said, "Don't be selfish," so I signed. And I've been paying the difference every month since. She went quiet. Then I tried a different tone. "Mom's health is declining. Her doctor says the stress." I cut in. "She's just now stressed? I was losing sleep for years trying to keep everything afloat. Nobody worried about my blood pressure." Click. She hung up. I lay back and stared at the ceiling, breathing slowly. That silence? It was no longer heavy. It was honest. I decided to check something else. I pulled up the county records website and typed in the fire report. I hadn't bothered until now. According to Amber and Mom, it was faulty wiring. Something is bound to happen in an old place like that. But the official report said otherwise. The fire originated in the upstairs bedroom. Cause: a space heater left running next to curtains the bedroom Amber used to sleep in when she stayed over. They knew. They lied. Let me believe it was my fault for living in a cheap apartment, that I'd ignored their warnings. But it had nothing to do with me. It was their mistake, their negligence, their silence. That afternoon, I stopped by the local library. A small folder on the community board marked media requests. I flipped through it and found a newspaper clipping. The headline read, "Local family devastated by fire. Daughter steps in." There was a photo. Amber, arms around Mom and Dad, standing before the ashes. I wasn't in it. I wasn't mentioned. The article talked about the fundraiser, about family resilience, not a single word about the person who kept their lights on for years. I sat there, numb. It wasn't just abandonment. It was erasure. I walked out into the cold, pulled my coat tighter, and kept walking. I passed grocery stores and the church where my dad used to lead prayer groups. Eventually, I stopped at the cemetery. I found my grandma's headstone. She was the only one who ever made me feel like I wasn't a burden. I knelt, placed my hand on the cool stone, and whispered, "You told me people would try to twist my heart into currency. You were right." Then I pulled a photo from my wallet, me and Grandma at the park. She had a goofy grin, and I was missing a front tooth. I tucked it behind her headstone, sealed in plastic, a quiet offering to the only person who ever saw me before I became the family ATM. Later that evening, I returned to the motel, my steps slower, not from exhaustion but from emotional recalibration. I didn't feel angry anymore, just tired. Tired from the pretending, the silence, the constant contortion of self to stay acceptable. On the nightstand, my phone was flashing again, 21 new missed calls and 3 voicemails. I turned it face down. Then I turned it off. The motel room smelled like bleach and lemon airspray, which tried to disguise mildew but never won. I pulled my laptop back onto my lap and stared at the desktop. There it was, the spreadsheet, every penny I had sent, a 6-year record of emotional IOUs disguised as financial support. I added up the total, $146,890.22. I said it out loud, then again, slower. It sounded made up, fictional, like no one person should have been carrying that quietly, especially not alone. Then I opened a folder marked Family Legal. Inside were scanned copies of shared financial accounts, insurance policies, and tax statements. And in one corner, a file I hadn't looked at in years. An old fire insurance policy I'd helped my mom set up. When I opened it, I saw something that made me freeze. My name had been initially listed as the beneficiary, but it had been scribbled out and not removed properly. I just lined through in pen. A new name is written beside it, Amber. No explanation, no signature, just one person's handwriting, a correction like it was a typo on a grocery list. And it wasn't new. It had been changed over a year ago before the fire. My name wasn't removed after the damage. It had been erased before anything burned. That hit harder than I expected. Not because of the money, I hadn't even known I was listed. It was the intent. The decision to quietly remove me while still letting me pay the premiums. It still allowed me to believe I was needed, and that my role meant something beyond a signature or a wire transfer. I leaned back on the creaky headboard and stared at the ceiling, letting that sink in. They hadn't just turned their backs on me after the fire, they'd written me out long before the smoke ever touched the roof. The next morning, I drove to the county office. The records clerk behind the counter, Darla, was a no-nonsense woman in her 50s with a nameplate taped down with Scotch tape and nails painted coral pink. "I'm looking for verification of a beneficiary change on a property insurance file," I said. "House on Lincoln Street, fire reported December 17th. She raised a brow. "Do you have your ID?" I slid it to her with a printed copy of the scribbled-over beneficiary page. She frowned, took it, and disappeared behind a door. I waited. 10 minutes, then 20. Finally, she returned. There was an amendment filed. November 23, beneficiary changed from Morgan Ellis to Ember Ellis. She paused, eyes meeting mine. "You're not listed anymore." "I'm sorry," I nodded and took the paper back. "Don't be. That's all I needed to know." I left without another word. My car felt like a coffin, silent, closed, and uncomfortably warm from the sun through the windshield. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I sat there with both hands on the wheel, staring at nothing. Halfway back to the motel, my phone lit up with a text. "Amber. You're being cruel. We're family. You're overreacting." I almost laughed. Overreacting? I'd been underwriting their lives for 6 years. What was underreacting then? Giving them a kidney? I turned off my phone again and kept driving. Not to the motel. Not to the co-working space, I didn't know where, until I parked outside their old house, what remained of it. Yellow caution tape still looped around the frame. charred wood piled like bones against the driveway. No one was there, no cleanup crew, no family salvaging what was left. Just emptiness. I stepped out and walked across the street. I stood there in silence. My eyes fell on a piece of debris glinting in the sun. Shattered glass from a photo frame. I stepped closer and picked it up. Inside was a burned photograph, half melted. You could still make out two people. My mom and I are in front of that very house. I must have been 14. She had her arm around me and I smiled like I believed we were happy. The corner of the photo had bubbled from the heat and my face half faded. I stood holding it for a long time. Then I walked back to the car. Back at the motel, the front desk clerk handed me a large envelope. There was no name on the outside, just my room number scribbled hastily. I opened it. Inside, legal paperwork, a letter from a local attorney. Amber and my mother were threatening legal action for emotional distress and financial abandonment. There it was, in writing. They were trying to sue me. I couldn't even be surprised. What do people do when their golden goose stops laying eggs? They don't apologize, they attack. I called my attorney. "Morgan," he said before I could explain. "I saw the filing. Don't worry, it's all smoke. They won't win, but we'll respond properly." I nodded. "Let them try," I said. "Let them explain to a judge how their abandoned daughter paid off their second mortgage and bought groceries every Thanksgiving while sleeping on an air mattress." That evening, I didn't even bother checking my phone. I knew what I'd find. Dozens of missed calls, more voicemails, more threats disguised as concern. Instead, I made myself a cup of instant ramen, sat cross-legged on the motel bed, and stared out the small window. The view was nothing, a brick wall, a dumpster. But the silence was mine. And for the first time in a long time, it didn't feel like loneliness. It felt like peace. The final wave of calls came the next morning. My phone buzzed non-stop, 42 missed calls in under 2 hours. Amber, Mom, even my Uncle Don, who hadn't spoken to me since the Obama administration. The voicemails were a carousel of guilt, rage, and fear. One from Amber stood out. "You can't do this," she said, voice shaking. "You owe us after everything we've done for you." That line, it landed like a slap and left the air still. Did I owe them? I sat on the edge of the motel bed, phone in hand, and played that message again. Then I deleted it. Not out of anger, out of truth. I didn't owe them anything. I had already paid. In silence, exhaustion, overdraft fees, missed vacations, and panic attacks at 2 a.m., I had given everything but a receipt. But I did owe someone. Me. I needed closure. Not the kind that comes with confrontation, but the kind you earn with final decisions. So I brewed motel coffee, bitter and burnt, opened my laptop, and logged into the fire department's report database. I wanted the facts. Not versions, not spins. And there it was. Clear as daylight. The fire didn't start from bad wiring, as Amber and Mom had claimed. It was a space heater, left on, unattended in the upstairs guest room. The same one Amber used whenever she stayed over. I leaned back and closed my eyes. They hadn't just rewritten the story. They'd assigned blame to the one person who wasn't even home. That same afternoon, I visited a nonprofit I'd applied to weeks ago, Financial Literacy Mentorship for Women Recovering from Economic Abuse. I'd nearly forgotten about it. When I stepped inside, the director greeted me with a smile that didn't feel forced. "Morgan," she said, "we've reviewed your application. We'd love to have you." I blinked. "Seriously?" She nodded. "Your experience, your insight, it's powerful. You can help a lot of people." For the first time in months, I felt my shoulders drop. Not from exhaustion, but from relief. It was like something inside me was finally unclenching. Later that night, I walked through the doors of my new apartment. It wasn't fancy. Second floor walk-up, beige walls, a scuffed countertop. But the key was mine, the lease was in my name, and no one else had access to my space or bank account for the first time in 6 years. I dropped my bag on the floor, opened the kitchen drawer, and pulled out the one thing I'd carried from place to place: a folded copy of the spreadsheet I once called Family Budget. I laid it on the table, uncapped a pen, and crossed out the title. New heading: Proof of Love, and underneath that, in smaller letters, Paid in Full. 3 nights later, I ran into Amber. Not planned, not dramatic. I was walking home from the corner cafe with a to-go box of leftover waffles, and she was parked outside the gate of my apartment complex, sitting in her car like she'd been rehearsing the moment. I hesitated. She rolled down the window. "Can we talk?" We ended up at the same cafe around the corner. There are no servers, just counter service and booths. She sat across from me, hands clasped, mouth tight. "Mom's not speaking to anyone," she said quietly. "Dad hasn't been to work in a week. They say you've destroyed the family." I stirred my tea slowly. "No, I just stopped being the glue." Amber's eyes flickered. "They think you hate them." I shook my head. "Hate takes too much energy. I just stopped lying." She leaned in. "Do you want me to beg?" "Because I will." I looked at her. "I don't want that. I want peace. You all can have the story. I'll keep the facts." Her voice cracked. "So, that's it?" I nodded. "That's it." We paid separately. I left first. Back in my apartment, I pulled out a letter I had written weeks ago, one I never sent. In it, I wrote, "I loved you enough to carry everything. Now I love myself enough to stop." I lit a match and let the paper curl into smoke over a metal bowl. There was no rage, it was release, like sweeping the last bit of soot from a windowsill after the fire had gone cold. The next morning, I walked into the nonprofit's office for my first mentorship session. A woman in her late 30s was waiting, nervous hands wrapped around a folder. I smiled. "Hi, I'm Morgan. I'm here to help." Her shoulders relaxed just a little. "I don't know where to start," she admitted. I nodded. "That's okay, starting is enough." When I got home that evening, I placed my keys on the table and looked around. No family portraits. There is no echo of obligation. Just me, a cheap lamp humming quietly, and one small plant by the window. The silence didn't ache. It didn't judge. It welcomed me. And for the first time, I realized I didn't walk away out of bitterness. I walked away because I finally understood that love without respect is just debt in disguise, and I don't carry debt anymore.